Hello and welcome to your Urban Connection. Remember, this is the channel that is often imitated, but is never duplicated. Now, I want to talk to you about uh, an organization that I've mentioned to you before, but I've got some new updated information. Now, the organization is called the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. And it appears that the Kansas African American Affairs Commission has not been doing very much in the way of conducting African American affairs. Matter of fact, they have done little to nothing. And therefore, they now find themselves being the target of a congressional audit. That's right. They right now, as we speak, are undergoing a audit by the Kansas Legislative Audit Committee. Now, it's not going well, and it's not going to go well, ladies and gentlemen, because as I've told you before, the Kansas African American Affairs Commission is totally ineffective, is it not in compliance with the state statute, and basically has done none of the duties and responsibilities they were charged with doing when the bill authorizing a Kansas African American Affairs Commission was signed into law by former Governor Bill Graves in 1997. Now, first, before I get into that, let me give you a little bit of idea of who the Kansas African American Affairs Commission is. It is a 7-member organization with an executive director. The 7 members are to be nonpartisan, meaning there is a makeup of a mixture of Republicans and Democrats on the commission. As of today, there are 3 Republicans and 4 Democrats. Now, the state statute says that no more than 4 of the commissioners can be of the same party. So there has to be a mix. So let me introduce you to today's 7 commissioners. And before I do that, let me just tell you the executive director is one Stacy Nail, who lives in Olathe. The commissioners, and I'll give you the Republican commissioners first. Commissioner Mark McCormick, Republican from Overland Park. Talia Penn, Republican from Wichita. Jonathan Westbrook, Republican from Wyandotte. The Democrats are Trent Davis of Salina, Burl New of Topeka, and Anthony Lewis of Lawrence, and Jonathan McCrory, Democrat from Wichita. So those are the 4 Democrats: Burl New, Trent Davis, Jonathan McCrory, and Anthony Lewis. Okay. Now, the problem that we have, ladies and gentlemen, or that they have, is that this audit that they're undergoing requires documentation for what they have been doing. In other words, documentation for compliance with the state statutes. Well, clearly they're in violation and have been for every single day of the Kelly administration. Every single day. Now, let me read to you what they're supposed to be doing and what the state statute calls for them to be doing. A, gather and disseminate information and conduct hearings, better known as town hall meetings, conferences, and special studies on the problems and programs concerning African Americans. B, coordinate, assist, and cooperate with the efforts of state departments and agencies to serve the needs of African Americans, especially in the areas of culture, education, employment, health, housing, welfare, and recreation. None of this is being done, ladies and gentlemen. C, develop, coordinate, and assist other public and private associations and organizations with understanding the problems of African Americans. None of that's been done under the Kelly administration, none of it. D, develop, coordinate, and assist other public and private associations and organizations to provide services to African Americans. Have you heard of any of that? Have you seen any of that? E, propose new programs concerning African Americans. Have you seen any new programs on your behalf? Have you heard of any that were developed by this commission? F, evaluate existing programs and propose legislation concerning African Americans. All right. G, stimulate public awareness of the concerns and problems of African Americans by conducting a program of public education. Have you seen or heard of any such education programs? I haven't. H, conduct training programs for community leadership and service project staff. Have you heard or seen of any training conducted by the Kansas African American Affairs Commission during the Kelly administration? Now, let me explain something to you, ladies and gentlemen. This stuff precedes this ineffectiveness, this non-compliance with the state statutes precedes the Kelly administration. But I'm just right now dealing with the last 4.5 years under the Kelly administration, under 2 executive directors. Because we're on the second one now. The first one was fired 2 years ago for lack of compliance, for ineffectiveness. Okay? And now we're working on the second one, and things have gotten worse, not better. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. I accept contributions to assist in the effectuation of this section and seek and enlist the cooperation of private, charitable, religious, labor, civic, and benevolent organizations for the purpose of this sector. I've seen no evidence of any of that. K, establish advisory committees on special subjects. That is totally non-existent and has been every single day of the Kelly administration. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say something to you. I wrote a letter to the governor back in September of 2019. And this is what I said. For the last several years, the commission has failed to perform the functions, powers, and duties outlined above. As a result, the Kansas African American Affairs Commission is not having an impact on the lives of over 165,000 African Americans in the state of Kansas. In the cities, in particular, of Wichita, Topeka, Kansas City, and other smaller cities in Kansas. Not one of these cities has received any communication advocation, nor education from the commission. There has been no attempt to hold town hall meetings to listen to the concerns of the African American residents in these cities, not to mention conducting a program of public education, nor health clinics for the patients suffering from heart disease, cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, etc. Now, you contrast the actions of the Kansas African American Affairs Commission to its counter agencies in the states of New Mexico, Oregon, Washington, Minnesota, as well as the District of Columbia and the County of Milwaukee. And you will witness the difference between performance and non-performance. The difference between qualification and non-qualifications. As a result of the failure to perform by this commission, a petition requesting their removal is now being circulated in Wichita, Topeka, and Kansas City. Now, that petition was delivered to the governor's office in November of 2019, and it contained 560 signatures. And out of the 560, and it was conducted here in Wichita, like I said, in Topeka and Kansas City, out of the 500 signatures, only 13 people were familiar with or had heard of the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. And that is why they today find themselves in the midst of a legislative audit, because they're doing none of the things that they're supposed to be doing. They're in complete violation of the state statute. So how do we get here? Well, first of all, you have to blame the governor and her chief of staff. They share the blame along with the commissioners who meet on a regular basis, and it's all talk and no action. Now, don't take my word for this. I would encourage each and every one of you to visit the website of the Kansas African American Affairs Commission and look at the minutes. Look at the minutes of their meetings and see what areas of the state statutes that I just read to you they are addressing or have addressed in the last 4 years, 4.5 years. And you will see why, finally, someone has decided to take action to determine why in the hell we're spending taxpayer dollars to fund an African American Affairs Commission that does not do anything for any African American in the state of Kansas. So we're paying money for something that we're receiving absolutely no benefits from. The Kansas African American Affairs Commission has no impact on over 165,000 African Americans in the state of Kansas. You know, I'm reminded of something here, and I want to ask you all a question. Do you remember back in 2017 when former President Donald Trump appointed a young lady by the name of Omarosa Madrigal to be a director of communications, and she's to communicate with African Americans throughout the country, where she had no qualifications for the position? No one else was interviewed for the positions. She was appointed by Donald Trump because of, well, I can't tell you that. I can't finish that. But she wasn't qualified. As a result, she didn't do anything. Nobody in the White House, nobody in the cabinet, nobody in the administration could tell you what her job description was. Nobody could tell you what she actually did. And finally, John Kelly decided we've had enough of this, because there was no reports to anybody. There was no oversight from anybody. She was out there freeloading, freelancing at $178,000 a year of taxpayers' money and not having to answer to anybody. That's exactly what you have here with the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. Governor Kelly and her chief of staff, when they decided to get rid of Kenya Cox, they did not follow statute 74-9904. And that statute clearly stipulated that in the case of a vacancy, the vacancy was supposed to be advertised, made public, solicit resumes from any interested parties. Now, why do you do that? Because you're trying to find the best person for the job. And that is the duties and responsibilities of the commissioners, not the governor. That is not her job. But the governor ignored statute 74-9904 and choose to take the position that she knows what's best for the African American communities and for the African American Affairs Commission. So she bypassed them, she ignored them. She went out and made a political appointment for someone who did not meet the education requirements, did not meet the work requirements, was not qualified, was a stay-at-home mom at the time, and put her in that position as executive director. Now, 2 years in, a little over 2 years in, ladies and gentlemen, you have to ask the question, how's that working out for you? How did it work out for Omarosa Medical? So it's the same picture, the same movie. It's just at a different theater, okay? That's what it is. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you know, you would think we've got a so-called Black caucus. We've got Black legislators in Wichita, Topeka, Lawrence, and 2 in the Kansas City area. You would think that these Black legislators whose constituents are all among that 165,000 people, you would think somebody from the Black caucus would go to the governor and say, hey, look, this is not working. My constituents are receiving no benefits. This organization is having no, not little, no impact on my constituents. We've got to do something. But no, they don't do that. They don't do that because most of them are Democrats. And they don't want to approach the Democratic governor with anything that they feel might make the governor upset. So they sit along and throw 165,000 Black constituents under the bus. And they don't say a word. Not a single one of them. They don't say a word. So now we have a situation where they have to understand and they've got to address the audit committee on why they've only had one town hall meeting during the Kelly administration. And I could say for the last 14 years, they've got to be able to document why it is they've not had one public education meeting or program. Not one during the 4.5 years of the Kelly administration, nor for the last 14 years. They've got to document that. They've got to document why there is no weekly reports coming forth to the public from the Kansas African American Affairs Commission, when I get these same reports on a weekly basis from several states: New Mexico, Minnesota, Iowa, Washington, the District of Columbia, every week. But I've not received one from the Kansas African American Affairs Commission for 4.5 years from the Kelly administration's Kansas African American Affairs Commission. They've got to document why there has been no annual reports, not to mention semi-annual or quarterly, no kind of report, written reports. And even the governor and the chief of staff have not received a single written report from this commission in 4.5 years. Ladies and gentlemen, they're in trouble. They're in trouble because they cannot document what they have not done. And none of the things that I have mentioned here have they done. So finally, you know what they say? Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to do you know what? Or get off the pot. Okay? You're either going to be committed to the position that you accepted, and nobody forced you to accept it, but you're going to be committed to bringing this commission into compliance with a state statute, or you're going to have to move along. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And the governor's going to have to learn that you cannot be making political appointments, providing favors to friends or people of your party, and neglecting and discounting the impact that this commission is supposed to have on 165,000 plus African Americans in the state of Kansas. You will have to learn that you don't have any experience with the Black community. You nor your chief of staff don't have the ability to run an African American Affairs Commission. You don't know the culture. You don't know what the issues are. And apparently they don't either, because they don't go out there and get involved in the community to find out. So there's no outreach. There's no communication. There's no nothing. Which means that you're trying to run a statewide organization with one paid staff member who is unqualified, does not know what she's doing. Now, you ask me, how do I know that? Because she is continually going to people in Wichita, Kansas City, and Topeka and asking for help. But she's asking for people that don't know how to give her help. Let me give an example. On August the 5th of 22, she got an idea of doing a State of Black Kansas report. August the 5th, 2022. So she decides to seek out the assistance of the former executive director, who didn't do one of these in 5 years on the job and was fired for lack of effectiveness, lack of qualifications, and she turns to her for assistance in how to do a State of Black Kansas. And she turns to another one of her friends, Benita Gooch, to ask her for assistance. And she turns to another one of her friends, Olita Fausto. And the first friend she talked to was Kenya Cox, who was fired as executive director 2 years ago. She preceded Kenya Cox. Ladies and gentlemen, Now, if you were starting to drive from Wichita to New York City tomorrow, who would you go and talk to find out what's the best route to take? Would you go to somebody that's never taken that route, that's never driven to New York City? Or would you go to somebody that has done it? Would you find a trucker? Or would you find AAA? Or would you go to somebody that has been that route before? Or would you go to some man on the street, a woman on the street who's never ever driven from here to Newton and ask them how we drive from Wichita to New York City? Ladies and gentlemen, that's not rocket science. Okay? That's not rocket science. And when you have an executive director that will stand on a public stage before a public audience and make a statement that the state statute is not a law and you don't have to follow it, you reveal right then and there that you're not qualified for this position because you don't understand the law. You don't even understand what it is you're dealing with. And when you tell me, when I suggested making an amendment to the state statute, as you told me on a Zoom call with the chief of staff, you tell me that you talked to one of your friends who apparently didn't know as much as you did, and she said it's almost impossible to amend the statute. I almost fell out of my chair. I almost fell out of my chair because that shows how little that this person who's being chosen as the executive director of a political organization, how little she knows about politics. And now we're seeing the results of an experiment by the governor and the chief of staff, an experiment that they undertook in May of 21 when they hired someone without the qualifications to run the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. So we will see how this audit comes out, and we will see what happens. Because in my opinion, there's only one way that this audit is going to turn out. They are not in compliance. They, the Kansas African American Affairs Commission, is having zero impact on 165,000 African Americans in the state of Kansas. They're not providing a single benefit. Oh, and by the way, somewhere along the way, ladies and gentlemen, I offered them the services of an expert in African American Affairs Commissions. They, the executive director, as well as the governor and the chief of staff, rejected that idea. And yet, they went and hired a local consultant. And I don't know how much money he spent, but a local consultant who doesn't know anything more about an African American Affairs Commission than they do. And that shows because since hiring the consultant, there have been no improvements in the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. One of the things they have done is they've instituted a program, a podcast called Lunch and Learn. Lunch and Learn, there has been 51 episodes of it to this date. And not one of them has reached 100, not even 75 views. The first one they did was May the 2nd, 22, with the now chairman, Mark McCormick. That's over a year ago. It has to date 6 views. Most of the episodes they've done have less than 15 views per episode. They have maybe 3 that have reached 25 views each. You call that a successful program? I don't think so. Now, don't take my word for this, ladies and gentlemen. Go to YouTube and look under Kansas African American Affairs Commission, and you will find the episodes and you will find the numbers. But this executive director wants you to believe that they're getting between 100 and 200 viewers. Something she can say, but she cannot document. So, and the big problem is that on none of these 51 episodes do they ever talk about what the Kansas African American Affairs Commission has done, is doing, or is going to do. Not on a single one of them. They're talking about what did you have for lunch? What the hell does that have to do with my health, with my kids' education, with the juvenile justice system, with welfare, with a job, getting a job? What does it have to do with any of that? That's why the viewership is totally missing, because the program is inept and you don't have an audience for that kind of program. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's what I have to tell you about the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. Now, the last thing I'll tell you is that as of this date, 80% of the African Americans in the state of Kansas does not know who the Kansas African American Affairs Commission is, nor do they know what they do. There you go. Okay? So I've said it, I've identified it, I've told you who they are. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wait and see what happens. We should know here within the next couple of months what the results of this audit is. But I can tell you right now, it's not looking good. It's unfortunate, and I hate to say it, but it's not looking good. If you have any questions for me, feel free to contact me by email or by phone or meet in person. Everything I've said here is public information. I can document everything I've said. So get in touch if you feel like anything I've said is misleading, is untrue, and I'll be glad to provide the documentation to you. I'm James Barfield, and I'm out.